Hey everyone, thanks for joining us for Interviewing 101. One second while I go ahead and start the presentation. Alrighty, so you got a quick sneak peek of a little bit of the fun that goes into interviewing. A lot of people do think that interviewing is a little daunting. It's a little bit nerve-wracking, and I get it. If you are new to it, it certainly can be. But my goal in giving you this presentation is to ease some of those fears, make those complex ideas a little bit more simple, and to hopefully give you some information you haven't heard before. I'm Ryan Mazon, by the way. I'm a program manager here in career services at Embry-Riddle. Feel free to follow up with me individually if you do have questions after this presentation. So let's go ahead and get started. My goal for you today is not be one of these fine examples that you see before you. So take a look. Hopefully you're not the possum here or my friend the chocolate lab. So when you are preparing for an interview, really that preparation is everything. If you prepare well, the interview when you get there is so much easier. Preparation should include your research on the company, the opportunity, and anything else relevant to that. Hopefully you understand the job and its role. You understand some of those key elements, the key values you'll need to communicate and need to possess and develop to be able to be a good worker in that job. Hopefully you can see parallels between your strengths and what the role needs to be strengths for the person that is going to get the job. Now, other things that you do research can include your salary range, and there's resources for that. You want to try on your actual clothes that you'll be wearing for the interview. I've heard too many stories where people try on their professional clothing the night before and it doesn't fit. Really, you should be trying it on and making sure it looks professional at least a week beforehand, so you have time to alter your clothes or even get new ones if need be. Even physically know where you are interviewing if you're going to a physical interview. A lot of people ask as well, what does the interview process look like nowadays? And that's truly an awesome question because it's ever changing, especially dependent on industry. You can expect some of the more traditional questions to be asked, but you can also be expected to take an aptitude test, demonstrate or present on different topics relevant to your job or the company or the industry. For specialized fields, you may do some type of simulation such as flight or technical skills that you may showcase, such as programming or other technological advancement. If you ever have a question about what the interview process entails, the steps, the schedule, all of the above, always feel free to ask the recruiter or your point of contact for the position, the hiring manager, if you will, via email. Typically, they send you a schedule and other info, but if you're missing anything, always feel free to ask. And a lot of people ask too, how do I practice the interview questions? How do I practice delivering my responses adequately? And a lot of that has to do with the answer structure. When you give an answer, you want to be clear and concise. I can't emphasize that enough. That is feedback we get from a lot of employers. With that being said, too, we're not just making up this info. This is all based on observations we have with students, but feedback we get from employers as well. That also includes giving examples. So use examples that may be stories, but they don't need a novel of your story, right? Just give those clear, concise bullets of your story that is relevant to the question. And you have to ask yourself too, is this information necessary and timely for the interviewer to know? Presence, that is this vague idea that we often try to communicate with students and interviewees, that your presence is everything. It's not the words you give, even if it's virtual, but it's your demeanor. It could be how you carry yourself. It could be your positioning on the screen, that type of thing. Mock interviewing really helps with that. So please feel free to reach out to a career advisor to do a mock interview. That really helps with your interviewing skills and comfort in general. But if you don't do a mock interview, you could also practice in front of a mirror. I think that's a good first step. You may feel silly when you do it, but practicing interview questions are not the same when you're practicing in front of the mirror. When you're in front of a mirror, you get to see all those little things that happen physically and visually to your face, your body language, and that's so important in communication. Professional attire. This is a presentation in and of itself, but if I had to be brief, you would not want to wear just a polo like I'm wearing here today. This could be a suit, a professional suit. It's typically a button-down shirt with a tie or other neck piece. Hopefully the color of said shirt is something neutral, typically a white or very light blue is appropriate. And then you want to go a little darker with the blazer, the suit jacket, and the bottoms matching the blazer. You always want to go for more conservative. You can always underdress, but you can never overdress. Hopefully that makes sense. With colors, conservative is really the best way to go. That's why we talk about doing like an off-white, a light blue for the shirt, and nothing more zany than that. And of course, shoes should be polished and professional. You can see a few examples there. Don't worry about the text. I know it's small. But grooming is important as well. Overall, with how you look, it really conveys a message of how you will present yourself professionally. And what you physically wear, whether it's an accessory or a piece of clothing, it should not be distracting. Now, to be able to tackle an interview successfully, we must first understand what types of interview questions there are so we know how to answer them, right? So let's start off by explaining leading questions. Leading questions are typically to get a specific response. You can see an example there. Have you ever been a member of a successful team? If so, describe the role. So it typically follows up with a description, something to expound on. Hypothetical is really where you're problem solving or evaluating an experience. If this were your first annual review with our company, what would I be telling you right now? That is hypothetical, it's in the future, but it tells a lot. And that's what I would say too, with any question you hear, you have to ask yourself, why would they be asking this? What are they really trying to figure out? The next question type for an interview question is open-ended. This is not where you say yes or no. This is something that they're expecting more. The interviewer is looking for your general explanation of something, and they keep it vague sometimes for good reason. When you're giving an answer to an open-ended question, remember, keep it concise. I think concise, if we give it some type of tangible, quantifiable time range, interview answers should really only be about a minute long, maybe a couple minutes tops if they're asking an open-ended question that is maybe multiple questions in one, that type of thing. Now, close-ended, of course, is the opposite. This is a pretty direct question that requires a yes or no. Now, behavioral questions, this is something we get questions about a lot, especially because it tends to be more challenging than other types of interview questions. And we'll talk about it more in, I believe, the next slide. But this is where they ask for you to use examples of past behavior to predict the future. An example is really any question that starts with, tell me about a time when. Tell me about a time when you had a conflict with a coworker or team member. These are important, but they can get long-winded because you use them a lot in giving different types of situations and stories. So we do have a method, a structure to help you keep your your answers concise, like we've been encouraging you to do. But before we get to that method, just wanted to end with one more question example for interviews, and that's technical. Again, they may ask you to showcase your technical skills if applicable, but this is where they ask you questions to really just show if you have technical skills or not, describing your aptitude, describing your proficiency with technical skills. All right, so I was correct. This next slide does talk about the technique in answering a behavioral question. Again, those are questions that typically start with a tell me about a time when. And that's the STAR method, which maybe you've heard about. Big companies pretty much make it mandatory for you to answer in this manner a lot of the time with a lot of their behavioral questions. So it's certainly something to practice, to really have in your repertoire, to not only use during an interview because it's professional, but help you structure your answers. STAR stands for first, S, which is the situation. This really sets the stage or the context for the interviewer. The task is the task at hand, where you describe positively what you have to do. The action is what you did to accomplish the task. And the result, probably the most forgotten, but maybe the most important piece to this puzzle in the STAR method, the result being whether you failed or whatever, just the result of what that action was to accomplish the task in the situation. So keep that in mind. It's something to practice. Again, keep it in your repertoire. Hopefully it helps you develop answers, helps you in the heat of the moment, keep them structured and concise. And again, feel free to practice it in the mirror, but all the way up to with a career advisor during a mock interview. Now, what can you expect when you're actually at the interview? Or maybe when you are doing some type of other interview, maybe a phone interview. Typically, phone interviews are pre-screening processes. They're so common nowadays because it really just verifies if you are who you say you are, you have accomplished what you said you accomplished in your resume, that type of thing. Now, whenever I am on a phone interview, I always have my headphones. That's same with a virtual interview too, a video interview, which we'll get to. But my headphones, because hopefully you realize too, if you use headphones of some type, your hands free. So you can write, you can move around, do whatever you need. But also whether it's virtual or on the phone, these headphones actually eliminate the risk of echo. And that's something I noticed with my own personal devices. It may be different for you. So you got to test it out, try it. I mean, I called my mom before I called an interviewer for an interview just to test out the stuff. And I always kept a power source nearby. So I kept it charged and nearby if I needed to charge it in the middle. One pro to doing an interview on the phone is that you can use a cheat sheet. So I always have my trusty ledger here, my Padfolio, if you will. But typically I have questions written down already, but I'm taking notes, which is good that your hands free as well with the headphones. One con though for phone interviewing is that it's obviously impossible for the interviewer to read your nonverbal cues, to read your body language, which is the majority of communication in human behavior. So you want to be very intentional with your tone. You want to smile with your voice, which is a more customer service skill. But you can tell that if you actually smile while you're talking, it changes your tone of voice just that much. And research shows that the person on the other end, the interviewer in this case, actually subconsciously knows that you're positive, that you are smiling, if you will, even though they can't see the smile. Now, during an interview, whether it's virtual or over the phone, you want to go to a room free of distraction. You can see nothing's really happening behind me or around me. I shut my computer off. I turned off my phone, and that's important. You want to make sure you turn off any other devices. Now, if you're using your phone, obviously, but maybe it's someone else's phone. Maybe you ask your roommates to step out, or you go to somewhere else that is private, has a good connection, that type of thing. You don't want to be chewing gum, virtual or over the phone, and speak directly into the device, whether it's a phone or the computer. You have to be patient with technology, and it's okay to blame things on technology, especially if it's its fault. And that means sometimes you'll have to ask the interviewer, oh, can you repeat that? Can you speak up a bit? I'm sorry. And be ready for them to ask you the same thing. Be patient. Be ready to repeat yourself, that type of thing. Typically in phone interviews, like I said, they're a pre-screening process. They're typically the first step of the interview process as a whole. So that's not where you bring up salary or benefits. Really, with salary or benefits, wait for them to bring it up. End the interview like you would end any interview. Ask questions, which we will go to a slide that tells you what are good questions to ask or not. You always need to follow up. We'll talk about that more soon. That means asking for contact information if needed. Ask what the next step is, and never forget to end with a thank you. Probably one of the most forgotten things, but it's a lost art. Make sure you show your gratitude. Now, if you're familiar with our Eagle Elevate program, there are career competencies that hopefully you're developing, and we can help you with that. One of which is digital technology, which video and digital and just in general virtual interviewing falls under that. So we can help you develop that competency, and we can talk about it more here. So check out this information. I've brought up a lot of the techniques, a lot of the tips, a lot of the things you should bring, right? But web-based video interviewing can be on Skype, on Zoom. It could be even FaceTime nowadays, or other third-party vendors and companies, sites, including GoToMeeting and other ones. Now, video interviewing, also known as digital interviewing, is where they have a preset of questions. You are not answering a person, but you're recording yourself answering that question. Sometimes you get 3 tries, but if you don't like the first try and you go to the second try, they don't let you keep that first one if that second one's worse, right? So keep that in mind. Digital interviewing is a little different because you don't have that face-to-face contact, but treat it like any other interview. Make sure your equipment's working, by the way. I've gotten onto a Skype interview and I thought I'd be fine getting on 15, 20 minutes early. I thought that was plenty of time, but I hadn't used Skype in so long. So when I got on, it started to automatically update, and it took so long. And luckily it finished literally 2 or 3 minutes before my interview started. I was able to log on, and I was like a minute late actually getting ready and everything. So don't be that person. Lighting, your surroundings is everything. I have a light on in front of me right now that I had to position so my face wouldn't look dark. That lamp behind me, if I turned it on, it would make me look like a silhouette, and it'd be so distracting. Remember, you don't want a distraction. You obviously, just like for the phone conversation, you want it to be quiet. In this case, though, you want it to be clean. What they see behind you as a background really shows who you are as a professional. I've heard too many stories that some students are embarrassed of, that they had to be in their residence hall, in their dorm room, and there was embarrassing posters and pictures and just dirtiness behind them. What do you think that said about them professionally? Now, keep all that in mind, but with all that being said, practice it. Like I said, I called my mom. I've, FaceTimed, Skyped, Zoomed, a lot of friends and colleagues, just to get comfortable with the system and the settings as well. I've gotten tips on that. So utilize these technology resources. If you're not comfortable with them, you'll be even more uncomfortable if you're talking to a stranger about your professional life. So I encourage you to work on that with a career advisor such as myself. Now, I brought up earlier, there are good questions to ask that you should prepare for and even write down on your good old Padfolio so you know what to ask. But there's also questions to avoid as well. Questions to ask can really be shaped on your values if you want to start there. But here are some examples in the slide there. Are there opportunities to grow? What's the departmental dynamic or structure look like? What's the next step after this? Now, I've brought up some good ones there, but I really want to emphasize a question you really just should avoid asking. And I would say generally avoid deal breakers. Asking something like, are there drug tests randomly for this position? What do you think that says about your professionalism and your lifestyle? That's a real question I've gotten from students of a question to ask the employer. You also don't want it to be a deal breaker in this industry. So if students say, how serious are you about confidentiality? I mean, you got to imagine, especially in aerospace and similar fields nowadays, they of course are going to be very stringent upon confidentiality. So just be careful. This is another lost art. Again, remember to say thank you, but especially after the interview, you want to send a thank you letter, a thank you note, at the very least, a thank you email to every single person you met along the way. even if it was someone that you just passed by, shook their hand, or just popped into the video interview shortly. That's why you always ask for follow-up, contact information, etc. You do want to send it within 24 hours of the interview, or even better, the same day. You want to focus on emphasizing those last themes of yourself, whether it's being a hard worker, what you would bring to the team, etc. And you also want to focus on how much you enjoyed the interview time you spent with the interviewers, all in your thank you letter or note. This is a lost art, but you got to imagine there are students, new grads, who don't do this. Just think how great it would look if you do this. I had a student who told me that he sent thank you letters to all 3 of the employers he had final interviews with, and he got offers from all 3 of them because they all liked him, of course, but they all appreciated that he sent a thank you note. And even one expounded by saying, you know, it was really neck and neck between you and another candidate, but that thank you letter that we got in the mail really put you over the edge, so we called you first for the offer. Now, that's why, again, it's important to follow up. I don't know why people aren't brave enough to do this. It's a little scary for them, maybe a little embarrassing, but that's why it's good to do it fresh while you're still on that adrenaline high, if you will, of the interview, and everything's still fresh. And when you do follow up or send a thank you letter, whatever, that's why it's good to take notes so that you're not relying all on memory, but you have literal words, information to put in your follow-up or your thank you letters. Follow-up's important though, because it really gives you a timeline of when you can expect to hear back from them. It doesn't hurt your candidacy to ask why you fell through the cracks if that's what happened. If they haven't reached out to you after a while, it's okay to follow up maybe a second time. All of this shows that you really are eager to start the job and to get the job. Now, with all this being said, be professional and respectful. We don't want anyone to call you a stalker or call you a nuisance. So just trust your gut when you're following up. After the interview, it's not unusual for interviewers to take weeks to narrow down the competition. Federal opportunities especially can take months. And that includes with, background checks clearing, etc. But certainly stay on top of it just so you can stay updated with your point of contact. A delay on the company side doesn't mean it's your fault. It could mean that they have a budget freeze, a personnel change, you name it. It's when students don't hear back for a while, when applicants are a little worried because they haven't heard back in a while, it's typically not their fault. It's typically due to processing time of the application process on the employer's end. With everything going on in the economy, I would say plan on it taking a little longer sometimes. Now, if you're ultimately not selected, as I mentioned before, you can always ask for feedback. A lot of people don't do this, but if you say something like, I'm a young professional, I appreciate your time, but if you can give me any feedback, if it's allowed in your policy, I'd really appreciate it. I know people that ask for feedback that get a little bit of it, or they just say, someone's just more experienced than you, is really just out of their control. But that person that won the job, it ends up not working out. Maybe they denied it or went somewhere else. Who do you think the next person is going to be that they call? You, because you asked for feedback, showed your maturity, even though you got the no. And it really just shows that you are still eager to do the job, even if you are the second choice. Now that's it. This is how you stay connected with us. Please let us know if we missed anything. If you have any feedback for us, let us know, especially on social media or over email. You can find my email on our website. Feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to provide any follow-up that you may need. Thanks for joining us for this Interviewing 101 presentation. I'm Ryan Mazon. We'll see you in career services real soon.